Hi, my name is Liz and today I have a really exciting video for you. For quite some time Zendaya has been making fashion headlines or the fashion headlines. This is probably nothing new to you, but as you may know, I love fashion history, I love vintage, and then I thought it might be fun to analyze Zendaya's best vintage moments. And I really appreciate what she and her stylist Law Roach have been doing, because you can see they have so much fun with fashion and they put a lot of thought into every outfit, no matter if it is dressing on theme for a movie press tour or if it is dressing for an award ceremony. And what I also really like is that you can see the full fashion spectrum. Big brands, but also independent brands. You may know this was born out of a necessity. Law Roach has been talking in many interviews about this, that in the beginning a lot of the big brands actually refused to work with Zendaya, so they had to be creative. But I think in the long run, this actually worked out as an advantage for them. And the handwriting of Law Roach is also very clear in her outfits. I also find his personal story very interesting, because in a recent interview with the Business of Fashion, he shared that his beginnings in the fashion industry were actually by selling vintage clothing from the trunk of a friend's car. He then opened up a vintage boutique in Chicago, and soon also celebrities came and shopped with him, but he really wanted to be a stylist. So he started to network. He also said he had to kind of fake it a bit until he made it. And one of his first clients was Zendaya. She was a teenager back then and worked for Disney. And since then they have been having this long-lasting business relationship, but also friendship. It's quite known that they have a very strong bond. And when he recently announced that he would retire, Zendaya asked him to come back and keep working for her, so he made an exception for her, and I think this strong bond is also reflected in all the outfits. And just to mention this here, I'm focusing on the fashion only. I'm not talking about the gossip. I'm also not analyzing any Easter eggs for fans that may be hidden in the outfits, because there are other experts for this. And this is also a non-sponsored video. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. But let's quickly move on, because we have quite a few vintage garments to discuss here, and I would like to start with one of the most iconic ones. In February this year, Zendaya wore vintage Mugler from his fall-winter 1995 collection, and it was this iconic robot suit. She wore it at the London premiere of Dune Part 2, and I think it was such a good match, because we are talking here about a sci-fi movie, and then she shows up as a robot, and it caused so many headlines. People were discussing how did she fit into this outfit, how did she sit down. I was not too much interested in those questions. I found it very smart to wear the robot suit. On the one hand, the media outcry was guaranteed, but at the same time, this garment is an iconic garment in fashion history, and it's also part of a very iconic runway show from the 1990s, probably one of the most iconic runway shows ever. In 1995, some journalists called this runway show the Woodstock of fashion, and Mugler was famous for his drama. He was also known to be a showman. You may know that he also created costumes for movies, but also for Cirque du Soleil. And he also kind of bridged this gap between art and fashion. And what Mugler did with this fashion show went beyond a normal runway show. It was an event. First of all, it was quite long. Already in the 1990s, runway shows were relatively short. His runway show lasted 1 hour. And it was an extravaganza that was even broadcast on TV, on French TV. So you can imagine how important that show was overall also for France. And while some journalists reported about fashion things such as the aerodynamic details, today probably most people remember this Gesamtkunstwerk of this show, because James Brown was performing and also the supermodels were walking. For example, Claudia Schiffer, Linda Evangelista, Nadia Auermann, and there were also veterans from the fashion industry, for example, Veruschka and Jerry Hall. Now you may say it was maybe more about the show than about the garments, but I wouldn't say that. I think the garments were very important, and Mugler managed to make them shine even more by creating this special atmosphere, by creating this kind of art installation of a runway show. Now, to analyze Zendaya's robot suit, we need to jump to look 43 of that collection. At first sight, it doesn't look like Zendaya's outfit at all. The model comes on the runway, she wears a big coat and a very big hat. Also, the light is very special. There is some kind of calm but also dramatic music. And then she slowly drops the hat. Then she also drops the coat, and then she steps out in this really kind of creepy looking suit. She's still wearing a sheer garment around her. It could be a skirt. And while she slowly walks on the runway, she also drops that skirt and presents that robot suit. The model wears a helmet, which looks kind of like a space helmet also. And when I rewatched this runway show for the preparation for this video, it kind of gave me goosebumps. It's the music, it's the way she walks. It's kind of creepy. She also walks back and then turned into a very special pose. So I think this effect was very dramatic at the time and probably is still in the minds of many people who have watched that runway show live. Mugler was inspired by the illustrations by Hajime Sorayama. Zendaya didn't wear the helmet. She wore an interesting hairstyle. I think they matched it quite well with the outfit. And this robot suit actually stands for more than just fashion. It also reflects things that were going on in society overall. So we travel back to this 1995 fall-winter collection, and this was the start of the digital age, the start of the internet. Everybody was talking about computers, everybody was talking about this internet where you had to dial yourself into with a modem. I still remember the sound of the modem, you can see how old I am. And it was a very exciting time, and a lot of designers also looked into the future, and space was a very big topic. I also mentioned this in my other video about fashion around the year 2000. Another thing that we have to bear in mind when it comes to the time, we are talking here about an haute couture collection, and this was the 90s, and suddenly this guy Mugler comes around and he celebrates the female body by using materials like latex on the runway for an haute couture show. And this is similar to what I said about John Galliano and his newspaper dress. They were kind of deconstructing haute couture, and this also created a big outcry in the media because this was something quite new for haute couture. And this suit became even more iconic when Helmut Newton photographed it for Vogue the same year. And now we talked about a runway show, some drama in the runway show that created an outcry. Mugler used drama to draw attention to his designs, and this may also have been something that Zendaya and Law Roach used for promoting her movie, because everybody was talking about this. Everybody was talking about her robot suit, no matter if it was comments about her sitting down or if it was about how iconic that robot suit is. And it shows that fashion can be a very good vehicle to also market movies or even other products. And this was not the only time that Zendaya wore vintage Mugler. She wore a very pretty lime green ensemble after she appeared on Good Morning America in April 2024. Let's stay with the futuristic themes of the late 90s and early 2000s, and let's travel to the Seoul premiere of the movie with Zendaya. She wore an ensemble by Givenchy from 1999, and this was when Alexander McQueen was creative director of the house. It was also an interesting time for the house. It was after Galliano, and Givenchy was still in this, let's say, situation that on the one hand they had the legacy of Audrey Hepburn, the little black dress, then you have somebody like Galliano coming in, and now you have the enfant terrible, the next enfant terrible, you have Alexander McQueen really shaking up this house. And this outfit looks very simple at first sight, but it showed me again that sometimes fashion and art history are not that different because you have to pay attention to the details. You could go through all of her outfits of the tour and say, yeah, she looked nice, she looked beautiful, but if you miss those details, you also miss how much thought the two of them put into the outfits, because when you zoom in, you see the embroidery, you see the circuit board that was put on this ensemble. And on the one hand, it reflects the times, as I said before, the late 90s, the early 2000s, this futuristic theme. And at the time, some journalists said it was Tron inspired, it was Android couture, that's how they called it. And then we see the link again to the promotion of her new sci-fi movie. So again, a very smart move, how the fashion actually is in a kind of dialogue of the whole movie press tour. And talking about Alexander McQueen leads me to the next outfit. You have probably seen it. It was her second Met Gala outfit. As you may know, she walked the Met Gala steps twice, first in a custom Magella by John Galliano design, and the second one was also Galliano, but for Givenchy. It was this Victorian style black dress with a very long and dramatic train. And this headpiece again was Alexander McQueen. Philip Tracy made those hats for his 2007 Sarabande collection. And it's quite an interesting headpiece because when you look closely, it looks like a flower bouquet turned upside down. And I have to say, in the collection, it actually looked less dramatic than it looked at the Met Gala. I think it's how they paired it with this black dress and this overall effect on the stairs, because in this 2007 collection, Philip Tracy made quite a few headpieces for Alexander McQueen, and there are many headpieces that are even more dramatic than this one. So I really recommend that you look into that collection. It's quite interesting to just look at the headpieces and how they then work with all these interesting garments that Alexander McQueen created. It was kind of a hint at his interest for historicism, for fashion history, because there are elements from many time periods. There were jabot blouses, for example, and lace skirts, and then these were paired with these really dramatic headpieces by Philip Tracy. And as I said before, this dramatic black dress with the long train was Givenchy, but by John Galliano from 1999, and I really appreciated the subtle link of the two creative directors, Alexander McQueen and John Galliano. And we could even say there's something else that they had in common. We could say that John Galliano had the same problem or issues as Alexander McQueen. Givenchy was famous for the elegance, for Audrey Hepburn, as I said before, and John Galliano and Alexander McQueen are both these enfants terribles, so what are they going to do with the brand? And in 1999, this was John Galliano's Couture debut. And many people were discussing what is he gonna do. There were rumors that he was going back to that legacy, this Audrey Hepburn style elegance, and then in this collection he did something very different. And looking at this collection today, we are probably not even that surprised that John Galliano did something completely different. It was very Galliano, it was drama, similar to Mugler. It made headlines because it was very different to what people expected. A lot of people actually didn't like it at the time. I went into the archives and I would say that Zendaya's outfit was look number 8 from that collection. It is this big black Victorian style dress. I could not determine the length of the train because, as we can see from the Met Gala pictures, there was a very long train. I could not see if the original one at that collection also had this long train. And another interesting thing about this collection is that John Galliano, similar to McQueen, what I said before, was interested in fashion history, in historicism. It also kind of became a signature detail of Galliano's designs. And in this collection, we see the Victorian details, for example. And I think he successfully managed to bridge the gap between his own style, these historicist details, and then the elegance of Givenchy, because he paired it, for example, with very elegant and simple pants, like in the look where he had this Victorian style blouse with simple black pants. I can understand why people were shocked at the time, because they were not used to seeing this. But looking at it from today, it is actually quite a successful amalgamation, we could say, between the elegant Givenchy designs and also John Galliano's handwriting. And speaking about big designs, this leads me to the next big vintage moment. It's probably one of my most favorite Zendaya fashion moments ever. I'm going to tell you why. She wore a 1982 Yves Saint Laurent Ensemble to the Black Women in Hollywood Awards in 2021. And on the one hand, 1982 marked the 20th anniversary of the house of Yves Saint Laurent. He celebrated it in a big way with his partner Pierre in a cabaret in Paris with a big party. And also at the time, he created these really big, iconic Yves Saint Laurent designs. A lot of you will think about his 1980s designs with these puffy sleeves and also with a lot of silk velvet and silk taffeta, which were materials that he was using throughout his career. And this is clearly reflected in Zendaya's outfit, but this is actually not the reason why I find it such a great design. It's actually the backstory of that whole dress, because it is from the archives of Law Roach himself. And he posted on Instagram that this Yves Saint Laurent design belonged to Eunice Johnson. You can even see it in the label inside of the garment. And he called Eunice Johnson a trailblazer. Eunice Johnson was a famous businesswoman, and she was married to John Johnson, a publisher, and together they co-founded a magazine which was modeled after Reader's Digest but addressed a black audience. They founded this in 1942. And in 1958, she started Ebony Fashion Fair in New Orleans and showcased black designers, black models, and also cosmetics for a black audience. And they traveled across North America and the Caribbean, and they raised about 50 million US dollars. And now you clearly see the geek, because I always look at the stories behind garments and outfit choices. And I think it was such a smart move that Zendaya wore exactly this iconic outfit, owned by such a trailblazer, to an event like the Black Women in Hollywood Awards. I think this was a real success, and I really appreciate that they showed yet again that fashion can also convey strong political messages. In 2021, Zendaya wore selected garments from the Valentino archive, and one of my favorite garments is this Poppie dress. So it has this poppy flower print and also quite a big belt with this big poppy flower on the side. I really love this. I also like the contemporary styling that they chose, and poppy flowers are a signature of Valentino himself, and I do think that this particular dress is also of importance for the brand, because when you look at their website and then browse for the archives, this is the first picture that pops up at the top. You can see this 1971 poppy flower dress. And in 2022, Zendaya wore archival Valentino again. I have to say, this is another favorite of mine. I really love this dress. It's this iconic black and white gown from the Spring-Summer 1992 collection. It has this scalloped hemline at the top, which is another Valentino signature. And back then in 1992, it was Linda Evangelista who wore that dress on the runway. And I also found a sister dress in white, which was sold on the website Shrimpton Couture, where you can always find a lot of details about the garments that are being sold. And Shrimpton Couture writes about this dress in white, that the panels kind of overlapped and there's piping, and the whole dress had kind of a three-dimensional feel. So it's not only this very flattering cut, obviously when you are holding it, it also has this very interesting feel. And I really like it when Zendaya wears Valentino, because she is an actor, and Valentino himself said that he has always been heavily influenced by movies. He loved going to the movies already when he was a young boy, and he marveled at all the beautiful ladies and hoped that one day he would be able to create garments for them. And let me illustrate this with a quote by Valentino himself. He said, "For me, a young guy of 13, to see this sort of beauty, I think from that moment I decided I wanted to create clothes for ladies." And maybe I'm overly romanticizing this, criticize me for it, but I do find it beautiful when I see people like Zendaya in Valentino's garments, because it shows that the dreams of this young boy watching the movies in Italy actually came true. There are quite a few discussions what counts as vintage overall, not only in the case of Zendaya, but I realized this again when I looked for the outfits. I found some that were 1 or 2 years old, and then she wore them, or they were 5 years old, and then people said it was vintage or archival. Yeah, technically we could say that, but I think we should look at a longer time period, and if we want to look at something really old, we have to look at her Balmain outfit from 1956. So there's no discussion that this is vintage or archival. It is this beautiful gown by Pierre Balmain himself. Pierre Balmain founded his own maison in 1945. During the war, he had worked for Lucien Lelong, where he also worked with Christian Dior. And all of these fashion houses were facing a challenge, because French fashion had to undergo kind of a rebirth after the war. And this dress stands for two things. On the one hand, it reflects the beauty ideals of the time. You will remember it. I have already mentioned this in other videos. It was the time of the new look created by Christian Dior. In the 1950s, it was all about accentuating this female body shape, very often with corsets. So we also have this style in this dress with this A-shaped skirt. And on the other hand, it also shows the needs of Balmain's clientele, because his clients were upper class. They had to attend different events, and there were different dress codes, and they needed different outfits. And I think even today this dress is still really elegant and timeless, and Zendaya just looked really, really beautiful. I would even say divine when she wore it to the NAACP Image Awards in 2022. As a big fan of Gianni Versace, of course, I'm excited when I see Zendaya in an archival design. And this is why I would like to point out one gown which she wore in 2020 for the Green Carpet Awards. These awards were held online due to the pandemic. And when you look at this dress from 1996, which is also the same year as Zendaya was born, at first sight, it looks quite simple, quite reduced, but I want to show it here because I talked a lot about Galliano, McQueen, Mugler, the drama, and also Versace created kind of a drama, and he also used this inspiration about the future and space, but in a very different way. The shape is signature, tried and tested Versace, it's fitted to the body, and then we have a small detail. We have this mesh part at the top with the rhinestones, the glittering rhinestones, and they are a very subtle nod to this space theme, to the future. So he also kind of picked it up, but it was done in the Versace way. Needless to say, I'm always most excited when I see archival Versace from before 1997, but Zendaya wore quite a few vintage Versace garments from after that time. So obviously she and Law Roach and the brand have quite a good relationship. And I would like to point out one particular dress. It's this purple dress that she wore in 2021 to the BET Awards. I hope I said them correctly. And she looks great in it. It's really fun. I really like this design. But again, it's about the story behind it. Why did she wear this? It was kind of an homage to Queen Beyonce, who wore the very same dress in a short version at the same awards in 2003. And for this last part of the video, I have a few more highlights which I would like to discuss here. The first one is a fall-winter 1998 Bob Mackie dress. It's made from velvet and I think it looks very beautiful. And for all those of you who are not too familiar with American designers, Bob Mackie is a household name. He started his career in costume design with Edith Head and Jean-Louis. And for Jean-Louis, he created the sketch for Marilyn Monroe's dress, which she was wearing when she sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President. Also the one that Kim Kardashian destroyed for the Met Gala. Bob Mackie became a household name when he started to dress the likes of Cher and Diana Ross. And I would like to mention here that it is actually quite difficult to find vintage Bob Mackie because a lot of his designs were actually custom designs, and Law Roach found this design at the studio of the designer himself. Zendaya also wore archival Louis Vuitton, for example, a 2004 puff sleeve blouse paired with the iconic multicolor monogram bag. And there were also some Louis Vuitton garments at the recent Challengers tour. For example, she wore this green and white checkered ensemble by Marc Jacobs for Louis Vuitton from 2013. And another one was a really cool look with this shirt and trousers in kind of a green tone, also Marc Jacobs for Louis Vuitton from 1999. And of course I have to mention a vintage Vivenne Westwood moment, because for the Challengers tour, Zendaya wore an ensemble from the 1994 Spring-Summer collection, which is also called Café Society collection. I think it's a great outfit. I love the pattern. I also think it's a very good fit with the tennis theme of the Challengers press tour. And there's also a story regarding the skirt. In a different color, Carrie Bradshaw wore the skirt, and when you look at the pictures, you see the same detail in the back of the skirt. And I would like to end this video with vintage Ralph Lauren. So we have this pretty white dress. She looks amazing in it. I love the styling. In 1992, it was worn by Cindy Crawford. But I actually have a theory about this. Law Roach in a recent interview said that he thought a lot about the term Americana, which is very often associated with white people. And in the past, they already did a collaboration with Tommy Hilfiger to redefine this term Americana. And Ralph Lauren is also very much part of this Americana lifestyle. So I think, again, they are trying to convey a strong political message about this Americana term, and Zendaya wearing the dress that Cindy Crawford wore in 1992. What do you think about this? Do you think I'm speculating too much? Let me know in the comments below. Also, please let me know what you think about Zendaya's vintage moments. Do you have a favorite, or is there any outfits which I didn't cover in this video and you would like to discuss it? Please also drop it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and if you could subscribe to my channel. If you want to read more fashion-related articles, please head over to my website, thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you liked this video, I think you might be interested in my other video where I discuss the background of the Barbie movie press tour outfits. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.